All right, my name's Hannah Hobbs, and I'm a fourth grade teacher at Heartland Elementary, and this video is a requirement of the EDU 585 ESL Leadership course at Georgetown College. And this is my colleague and friend, Jessica Berthold, and she teaches fifth grade at Heartland Elementary and has had several ESL students over the years. So I'm just going to give you a little rundown over what I've done in my leadership course this semester. So myself and my classmates, we have been researching and learning about ESL techniques throughout our program. But this course kind of took it to a deeper level. And we had to pick a school in our district or area and give them recommendations on their ESL program based on information we collected from that school. So I worked with West Arden Middle School. And it was kind of good because I noticed a lot of similarities between things that they do when they service their ESL students and things that we do when we service our ESL students. And since we're in the same district, it's kind of similar. Nice. Yeah. So one similarity I noticed was that the reliance of the ESL instructor when servicing our students. So this is something that happens in our school too. A lot of people think that it's the sole responsibility of the ESL instructor to provide modifications and accommodations for our students. But the thing is that they're in the mainstream classroom for most of the day. And so really it's our responsibility to be providing modifications and accommodations.
Just like you would anybody else that needed them.
Exactly. So, and actually according to Title III law, teachers have to provide ESL students with an instructional environment where they're learning language skills and where teachers are using best practice. So we actually have to be incorporating language skills legally.
Ethan, Allie, and Caroline to the office.
I told you it would happen. But a recommendation I made to fix this was at the beginning of the year, if we could meet with our ESL instructor as a grade level and go over our students' access scores and make a plan for modifications in the classroom with the ESL instructor. Also, just sharing lesson plans with our ESL instructor would be beneficial so that they can build on content knowledge while teaching language skills. So I know you're familiar with access scores because we receive them, our school hands them out from the district. But do you know much about them?
The most that I know about them is that they're given to me at the beginning of the year by my ESL instructor. And she goes over them in my parent-teacher conference with the parents of my ESL students. Okay. And then that's the extent of it. Yeah,
so that's basically what I've experienced too, and I honestly didn't know much about it before I started the program at Georgetown. But access scores are a really great tool for teachers because they break down the students' proficiency levels in reading, writing, speaking, and listening, and they give them an overall proficiency rating, so a 1 being the lowest and a 6 being the highest. And from there, you can determine where your students are and what they're really struggling in. Because I've had some students who, and I'm sure you've experienced this, who are really proficient in speaking, but they might not be able to keep up when I'm teaching
or reading.
As far as listening. Yeah, exactly.
How often are they tested for that?
Once a year. And actually, our ESL instructor just stopped me the other day and told me that they were ready for us to view, so... But something that can help you to break down the access scores from that is if every grade level could have a copy of the WIDA can-do descriptors. So the WIDA consortium is kind of what heads the ESL world. And the can-do descriptors are a booklet, and they tell you what each student can do based on their proficiency level. So they're broken down by subject area, grade level. And let's say you were in social studies and doing I know you all do the living history. So if you could find something similar to that and it could say, hey, this child might not be ready to do a living history report, but instead they could do this and it's more on their level. So it kind of gives you ideas for how to assess your students and differentiate. So one of my suggestions was that they purchase the can-do descriptors, at least for one for every grade level. And if you ever want to borrow mine, I have mine in my classroom. So, another thing I noticed is that there's a really limited opportunity for their teachers at West Hardin to attend ESL professional development.
Same.
Yeah, which is something that our school also struggles with. And this is a problem because the teachers aren't learning and growing in that area. Even if we could do, a recommendation that I made was to do an internet professional development. I know we have the EPD system.
Right.
So if we could do something on there, or if all the ESL instructors from the district could even get together and lead a PD for us instead of bringing someone in, that might be easier. Just so we know basic tips and current research on ESL techniques. But it's also a requirement by Title III law to provide ESL students with highly qualified schools. So if we're not getting professional development, then chances are we're not
highly qualified.
Right, we're not highly qualified to teach those students. Another thing was overall attitude toward ESL students, because I know a lot of times having an ESL student can seem like a challenge, but we really shouldn't view having an ESL student as a challenge. Instead, we should view it as an opportunity for us to grow and our other students to grow.
And if you think about it, all students have something special that they need to be targeted and worked on. So
exactly.
The language is no different.
Yeah, exactly. So that's something that I said was that an easy way to celebrate students and their culture is by letting them showcase things about themselves, family traditions, that kind of thing. One thing that we talked about in class was it can showing someone you appreciate them can be as little as pronouncing their name correctly. Yeah. And teachers can also do home visits, which shows that you're invested in learning about their family life and what goes on in their home.
And something that I've noticed too with my students in relation to that, even just remembering at home that mom doesn't speak English, but dad may. Like,
right.
When you go home, make sure you give this to dad so that he can tell mom and they can all be on the same page, because sometimes the students are afraid to remind you of those things.
Exactly, yeah. I'm really glad you brought that up because that comes up later on when we talk about learning environment. That's so true. I'm glad that you said that. Another suggestion that I made for their school was that each grade level team should be provided with a copy of a book that we read in class, and it's called Explain This to Me, Our U.S. School. And it's actually by my professor, Christelle Brody. And this book breaks down school procedures so simply for families that might be new to the American school culture. So it could help staff walk parents through every process of the school year. And it breaks it down so that's simple and direct, and it gives helpful hints and explanations like car lines, recess, snow days.
The things we take for granted as being easy.
Exactly. And that's what I said. We really do have to break it down to new families if we want them to feel like they're a part of the school culture.
You can't just assume that they already knew.
Exactly. And so those are things that we take for granted and that we have to realize other people don't just automatically know. And also, that book translates every section into Spanish. So, yeah. And I just went on to say that it encourages the use of translating tools to send home any back and forth communication. And then it also gives teachers the tools that they need to reach out to family members and include them in major school events and just kind of make them part of the classroom community. So based on these suggestions and these recommendations, a lot of people would say that's all good and well, but why is it important? So the reason that it's important is not just because we want to provide our students with the best learning environment possible and just because we want to be effective instructors, but also it's the law. And And if you look into Title III law, and I'm just going to place this in front of you so I don't move too quickly. Title III law states that, its purpose is to ensure that ELL students become proficient in English and are held to the same high standards, to provide assistance to ESL students so that they're able to meet the same standards as other students, to ensure there are highly qualified schools, to assist schools in creating a highly qualified learning environment, to promote parent involvement in language instruction of ELL students, to assure that students are learning language skills while learning content, to hold schools accountable for the achievement of their ELL population, and to ensure that schools are using best practice and research when instructing.
Earlier, when you said that the district with the PDs and things like that, do they fund or provide to encourage schools to be, what was the wording, highly qualified?
That's a really good question, and one that I really don't know the answer to. And
so that could be part of the reason that we don't have many highly qualified, or I mean, I don't know if we do or not.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a great question. I actually don't know. But that's something that I could definitely
be worth looking into.
Ask. Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is that a lot of people don't know about Title III law, right, and they don't know what it states or what's included. So this was just kind of a quick rundown, but basically, if you're not treating all students the same and not holding them to the same high expectations and giving them the same chances of success, then
you're not really meeting.
Exactly. So also you might ask where I got my recommendations that I made. And we had to read a book called The Cross-Cultural Language and Academic Handbook. And it's a really good text. You do have to have like a little background knowledge on ESL to fully understand it. But it's less technical than some of the other texts we've had in class. So I have that also if you ever want to look at it. But so some of the big takeaways that I took from this text are learning a second language connects people across cultures, and this cultural process enriches everyone. So this is something to keep in mind going along with that positive attitude and why we want ESL students in our classroom, because it enriches us, it lets us learn about new cultures, it gives our other students a great cultural experience. And so that's just kind of the frame of mind that we want to keep. And also by 2025, 1 in every 4 students will be an English learner. So this means that in a standard 30-child classroom, 7 students will be ELLs. So also it's kind of like we're no longer teaching to a homogeneous group of students.
Right.
This is our life, and we have to adapt, and we have to do what's best for our students.
Our job.
Exactly. Another thing that we've learned in our ESL courses that is really important is that when we think about learning language, sometimes I know I think of it as breaking things down into grammar rules or into phonics. And actually, the best way to learn language is through genuine experiences, not in a vacuum. So ESL students learn better when interacting with their peers. So I know we're doing the Kagan collaborative cooperative learning, and I know that kind of establishes a classroom environment of a back and forth between students, which is good. And another thing that I learned was about creating a safe learning environment, which you were talking about earlier. And this means that every student feels safe to share their thoughts and ideas. They don't fear being ridiculed for something that they get wrong. They have to feel like their teachers are invested in their culture and their background. And we talked about it can be as simple as just pronouncing those names correctly. And they have to treat all students with respect. So these things are kind of common sense for us, but we really just need to take the time to reflect if that's what we're actually doing. So one way to create a positive learning environment with our ELLs is to allow them to use their first language in the classroom. Even if you don't fully understand it, or even if you don't have a translating app or anything like that, it just kind of lets them know that they can be comfortable in your classroom, and they don't have to forget about their personality and where they came from just to fit into the groove of our classrooms. So it kind of just promotes that acceptance and helps students with idea development and comfort level. So another thing that we need to know about our ESL students is understanding where they're at with their native language and also their past experiences with learning English. For instance, if someone's been constantly overcorrected when they're first learning English, they might have shut down. They might be unwilling to speak. So,
Miss Caroline, please come to the office.
so they might have to, it might take time with a more positive approach to really turn that around. And it's also important that educators understand perceptions of cultures from our own community and country. So one thing that we learned in class that I thought was really interesting is how there's a language bias. Parents are okay with their children learning Italian, but they don't promote languages of that are most popular among immigrants coming to the United States, which is kind of silly because one isn't more valuable than the other. And really, if one is more valuable, it's one that you're going to use more often.
More frequently.
Yeah. And it's important to remember, too, that all languages express the same thoughts and ideas and feelings, and that no language is superior to another. In fact, it went on to say that there's no such thing as a primitive language, which I thought was really powerful. Because sometimes, too, I'm even guilty of thinking in that way. Or if a language isn't popular, then it's primitive. But it's not. We should also keep in mind the struggles that our students are facing when they're learning a new language. So one thing that we learned is that knowing a word doesn't just mean being able to read it or recognize it. It means that you can pronounce the word, use it correctly, know what sounds go into making that word. There's a lot that you have to know just about one word. And there's also a lot of informal things that we don't think about, kind of what we were talking about in car line and snow days and things. There's things that we don't think about in conversation. So we have to really teach our students conversational cues that they might not know. For instance, when you're talking to someone, you should be facing them and your eyes should be on them. And there's also procedures for turn taking that they might not understand. So things that, like you said earlier, we take for granted. Also, we need to have a good understanding of what culture is, and we really need to understand how it impacts our students and how they see the world. A good quote from our text that I wanted to include when I talked to you today was, "Culture is not only the filter through which people see the world, but also the raw dough from which each person fashions a life that is individual and satisfying." So, in a way, everyone is kind of their own little melting pot of culture and what they've picked up from different people and cultures along the course of our lives. So, I used this theory and I used all these different texts to make these recommendations to that school. And that's something that I think that we should work on as a school as well. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to do my project with our school just because of certification requirements. I had to work with a middle school. But this course has really taught me advocacy and speaking up for our ESL students. So I think it's important to share with our administration as well and really be a voice for
I know
them.
in the past I've been told that our district ESL people are not certified teachers. Is that true? Do you know?
They are, so our ESL staff is made up of certified and classified staff, but they're actually all certified. So we only have, in our district, we have, I want to say 3 certified ESL positions, and the other ESL positions in our county are considered classified, but they're given to certified teachers.
Gotcha.
So they're getting paid less for the same job just to get their foot in the door.
They have the same education
Yes.
and training.
Yes. And the way that the ESL program works is that you can get provisionally certified if you're in an ESL program. Like right now, I could have my provisional certification, but with the understanding that I would go through, complete my program, and take the praxis.
And then you would be considered certified.
Yes, exactly. Do you have any questions for me? I feel like I could tell you a lot more. I just tried to hit the main takeaways.
I don't think so. I mean, I agree with a lot of the things that you filled in. I do think it's interesting that you point out that a lot of people depend mostly on the ESL instructor. And as a classroom teacher, I can see where it is hard to make sure you constantly incorporate them and provide them those accommodations to meet their needs. But just like you would a special ed student or a regular ed student, I mean, it's very important to keep in mind that they need those services too at all times. So.
When you said what you said about special ed students, it kind of triggered another interesting fact for me about my course. And we have experienced this and have been remedying it as a school, but there's a lot more special ed referrals for ESL students, just because their main difficulties are coming from being an English learner. So sometimes data shows that they might need to be in KSI or be referred. But really, if it's a language issue, then they shouldn't be referred to special ed. And that's something that we've worked on. So I know in our meetings we've talked about that.
That could even tie in with behavior too, though. Like misbehavior in the classroom could come from frustration and not understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something, I have a student in my room this year who last year was a huge behavior problem, but it was his first year in America, and his school was so much different than our school. It kind of all goes back to the things we take for granted and have to explain to our students. And
we assume that all students know.
Right, yeah, or that it's the norm when really it's not. But I really feel like throughout this course, it was a little disappointing because I consistently thought we as at least as a state, I just know from my the people that I'm in class with, but most likely as a country are failing our ESL students, and we're not putting enough focus there. But the hopeful thing is that once we get the information we need, even just the talk we had today, if you take that back and share that with your team, if I take what I learned and share it with administration and they share it, then we can make a really positive change. And just learning little bits of information like, oh, I didn't know that about access testing, or I didn't know about WIDA, can make a huge difference. So one step at a time. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks for teaching me.